Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
For those who are joining from LA, just, the background of this group, we back before pandemic started watching Shtisel, and then we watched both seasons of Shtisel and then watched Mikimi, which is a 5-part, I believe, series on Amazon Prime. Yeah. Amazon Prime that is based on an autobiography of a woman who's a Baalat Tshuva, who she was a TV personality who became a Breslov Chassid. And now we're doing Srugim with y'all. So, with what's his name in the park? What's the guy? Why am I forgetting his name? The guy who goes and sits in the park.
Amir.
Yeah. Amir, right, when he's going to the park, the people there are presumably Breslov Chassid. Yeah, I mean, not presumably, they even quote from Rabbi Nachman. So it seemed pretty clearly to be Breslov Chassidim, who they're kind of their own Chassidim who are...
They didn't have Nanach hats.
What was that?
They didn't, you're right. They didn't have the kippah that has Nanach. You already said that.
No, they didn't have the Nanach, Nacham, Nachman kippah. It's true. But they quoted from him about, this idea that, everyone has their own song inside them, right? That's something that, Hasidim in general, so most Hasidic groups are very inward focused. And the two big exceptions to that are Chabad and Breslov in very different ways, which are very outward focused, and both also don't have living rabbis. So it's sort of, they're interesting Hasidic dynasties in that they're not really dynasties. They're sort of continuing the thought and the ideas of rabbis who are no longer living. With Breslov, Rabbi Nachman, who died, 200 years ago or so. And very known for kind of dancing, singing, often a lot of drug use. And there's sort of that like fine line between, and people who study, historians who look at Rabbi Nachman say he was probably bipolar. There's a lot of similarities between his writings and kind of, the mania and depression back and forth. So often it's kind of something that attracts people who are more like those guys in the park, a little bit kind of not in this world so fully, if that makes sense. So that's what how the group that he ends up with. Okay,
so should we jump into this episode and what we're going to talk about?
We can do that. I mean, it connects. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. No, I just mean what we're going to talk about in this episode.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to introduce it, or do you want to introduce it?
Go for it.
Okay. So we decided that we were going to talk about head coverings, and I'm specifically not saying kippah, because we're going to talk about all kinds of head coverings, and I even brought props, which I'm very excited about. So I'm glad that Norm's also excited. So we're going to talk a little bit about what different head coverings mean, what they might signify, what we saw in the show. As you saw, Amir didn't have his kippah and thought that people weren't saying Shabbat Shalom to him because he didn't have his kippah. And then one of my favorite things that people do is he ran with his tallest bag over his head to get back to the shul, which... Anyway, I just think it's funny. It's like when people put a tissue, like a 6th grader puts a tissue over their head so that they can say motzi. It's like, oh, all right, sure, fine. But then he finds this kippah, and we're not really sure who gets the kippah from, because the Gabbai doesn't seem to remember that person, or it seems like...
Eliyahu Hanavi.
What?
It's an Eliyahu Hanavi.
Sure.
Yeah.
Whatever.
It's like one of those Eliyahu stories,
It was mystical.
Yeah.
It was right. I was just about
Eliyahu always is the presence when we don't know who it is.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wouldn't expect it in like a 21st century film, but yes, sure. In our liturgy, that is true. I will give you that. Anyway, so we're going to talk about the different head coverings that we saw both in this show, but also in general that you might see around. So I'm going to let Rabbi Pernick begin, because his head coverings have more to do with what we actually saw in the episode, and then I'll chime in with some talk of female head covering.
Great. So Norm brings up a great point in the chat. Isn't Srugim a reference to a specific kind of head covering, which is yes, it is, right? Right, which is a kippah like mine that's knitted.
Did you see the picture that I sent you?
I saw that you sent me a picture, but I didn't.
Good. Okay.
You can,
I'll share it. Yeah.
You can share it. And that's a way of referring to people, right? They're referred to as Srugim because they are people who wear a kippah srugah, knitted kippah. And, there are all kinds of signifiers sociologically, right? None of this is halachic at all. Even wearing a kippah is not halachic. There's no law that you have to wear a kippah. But there's so many ways in which identities are sort of projected on people based on what kind of kippah they wear. I remember when I used to live in Charleston, South Carolina, one of my rabbis talked about how in an interview he was asked, I think it was a phone interview, and they asked what kind of kippah he wore. And he said, I think if you're asking me what kind of kippah I wear, I'm probably not the right fit for you. And he wore like a black velvet kippah. He's pretty Haredi. But he said, sort of like, I think if that's, if you're really looking for someone who fits a box that neatly, like I might not be your guy. And we see here, obviously, in the episode, the way in which, as soon as his kippah shifts from the kippah srugah to the more Breslauer style kippah. Again, it's not a real Breslauer kippah. It doesn't have the little stuff on top and the Nachman words on it. But stylistically, all of a sudden, he's now being looked at differently, and people are assuming all kinds of things about him, based on the kippah that he's wearing. And I think it's like really an interesting experiment. And I know people have done that. Right? There was a story a couple months ago, not a good story. Oh, maybe it was like of someone who went and wanted to experience, they're studying for conversion. And so the rabbi said, the guy said, I want to experience, they say when you join the Jewish people, do you know that we've always been oppressed and, all for centuries and all of that. So, I want to see what it's like. And he wore a kippah to the supermarket and started getting yelled at by the person behind him in the supermarket, in the grocery store for being Jewish, even though he wasn't actually Jewish yet. So it's, that's the difference between wearing a kippah and not. And, for me personally, I started to wear a kippah all the time when I was in Israel, I guess 2 years before starting rabbinical school. And it's interesting to see, for me, I noticed, before that I would wear it if I was like studying, and then I would take it off. But it was like Sukkot time, and Sukkot, you're going to eat, and the time you go to eat, you're in a sukkah, you're saying a blessing on Leishev Basukah. I was like, you keep it on. And even noticing, you stop by a falafel place, and the person, when he gives you a falafel ball, is that, they always give you one to taste. Say, shakol. There's like, or you'd walk into a McDonald's to get an ice cream cone. And at that point, was fine eating a McDonald's ice cream cone in Israel, even from a non-kosher McDonald's, because I knew that ice cream was kosher. Right? Started walking towards a place, and the people inside behind the cash register, lo kasher, like it's not kosher. It's like, I know, I'm walking. So it really does sort of mark it sort of marks a status in interesting ways. The difference between wearing and not wearing, but also, what type of kippah you wear. And
can I show that picture now? That
please. And
then you can go through it.
Can you share?
I'm just trying to show up. There we go. Okay. Can everyone see this? Yeah. I don't see any nods. Yes. Anyway. Yes. Okay. Great.
Okay. I like this. Okay. Great. So crochet.
I sent it to you so you could share it. You could have taken all the credit.
I didn't read it. Okay, interesting. So crocheted says, so this is the type that Amir typically wears, but you might differentiate between, a colored crocheted versus a non-colored, I wear a black crochet. Does that mean, more Haredi? I don't know. But, so crocheted, the kippah srugah is sort of associated with, it says religious Zionism, modern Orthodox conservative Judaism. So, okay, everything, which is kind of true. Someone who wears that kind of kippah is not Haredi. I would say they seem to, it's not something that Haredi Jews typically would wear, but anything else kind of fits. suede is interesting. That's kind of like a bar mitzvah kippah. So it says modern Orthodox conservative reform. I feel like that's something that usually is worn by, it's like a bar mitzvah kippah. It's not something that people who wear kippah all the time normally wear. So I don't know what's terylene.
I don't know. I was hoping you knew. I have no idea.
Okay. Black velvet is classic, yeshivish Hasidic Haredi. My dad's on the call as a reform rabbi, and there's been times when people for their bar mitzvah kippot have like gotten black velvet or like something that looks like a black velvet kippah. It's really interesting. So it's like, oh, that's surprising. They did leave out the shrine. Well, I guess it's not a kippah. It's fair. Yeah. So, okay. Satin, is that like satin's the
sounds like those ones? Big ones. Yeah. That you might find in a bar mitzvah or something.
Okay. Then white crocheted. So the one that's here in the example is the Nanach Nachman. That's a very Breslauer with the strings on top also. But that's like very, very, identifiably Breslauer. But at the same time, white kippot in general, the white crocheted, for one thing is on Shabbos. A lot of people who wear colored kippot I actually do this too, who wear colored kippot during the week wear white kippot on Shabbos. It's just like a Jerusalem thing. Also wear white shirts. It's just a Jerusalem thing. But yeah, the knit pom-pom that's like very distinctly Breslov. Okay. Bukharian are popular with children because they stay on your head. I have some of those at my parents' house. Yemenite.
It's like the really stiff. It kind of looks like the same shape as the satin one, but it's like a really stiff fabric.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
I think so. But yeah, I think, there are ways just, I think in modern society, always in human history, we look for ways to judge people as soon as we meet them, and to put them into a category, which is not necessarily bad. You see someone coming at you, you have ways psychologically of sort of making a snap judgment of like, is this person safe? Or should I run? Like, is this person someone I might be friendly with, or should I be wary of? So there's also ways in which we sort of say, like, is this someone who might be kind of part of my community or not really? And kippot have sort of served that function. Again, there's absolutely zero halachic reason why there's any such differentiators. It's just sort of like once this has become a norm, now if you wear that kippah, you're associated with a certain thing. And as soon as Amir puts on a different type of kippah, suddenly he's having different types of interactions. And, this is sort of an exaggerated version of that. But I think it is something that's pretty, I would say, real to experience. Like I've certainly experienced that in certain ways. Yeah. Surrey.
I just looked up terylene, and it's a synthetic polyester fabric.
Okay, now I'm interested. So I'm gonna look it up as well to see, because I probably when I see it, I'll be like, oh, that kind of kippah, yeah. So,
are those like the kippahs, like the ones that they use at like funeral homes that you can just like those are made up. Rabbi Barbara is shaking her head yes, and your dad is shaking his head no. So very good.
I'll show you. I'm going to share my screen so I can show you.
Okay, mixed signals.
So this is a terylene kippah. It's not thin like the funeral.
Oh, okay.
It's a thicker fabric.
Got it.
And yeah, so there's like the funeral ones which are very thin, and and we saw earlier with Nati's friend in the area. This is something that, I mean, I didn't know what that fabric was called, but terylene apparently. But yeah, so it's also Haredi.
These are the ones that have like the clip in, you know how that's like a thing out for kids?
Some do.
Okay.
But I mean, I think on your sheet it said something about like, Roshei Yeshiva is a kippah that Roshei Yeshiva wear. Like, it's true. It's like an alternative Haredi kippah. You have a choice to do velvet or terylene.
Okay.
Great. My presentation is now.
I'm glad to add that to my vocabulary. Okay, my presentation includes props. Okay, yes, Karen. Before my prop presentation.
We also talk about the figment of imagination of the rabbi that was not ever a part of that shul.
Yeah. So I'm gonna encourage us not to talk too much about it this episode because we may or may not come across that idea in other episodes, and it might become more clear as to what that is. So instead of me trying to not tell you something and Rabbi Pernick trying to guess, we'll leave it until it happens again and then bring it up.
Like with the proposal, it seems like it's something that's sort of dropped in and they're not clarifying intentionally yet what's going on. They're sort of like, we're going to drop this here and then we'll come back to it later.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought, just saying, I thought about when he went back to return it.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought about the whole crying episode and making a song and blah, blah,
yeah.
blah. And then going there, it was like.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was very good film production.
I was also wondering, and I didn't go back to check, was when the guy he encounters is singing.
Yeah.
Right, when
yeah.
But is he singing the same? I didn't know the nigun that Amir was singing when they said, like, what's your song? I didn't recognize that.
He made it up.
He just made it up on the spot?
Non-existent.
I wasn't sure if he was, like, singing that same melody that the rabbi was, whoever the guy was singing in the shul.
I don't know. My
mom says no. So
I don't think so. I think he was like singing like actual davening tunes. At least that's what I'm remembering. And your mom is nodding, so we're gonna go with that.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out, because usually if someone starts singing, it's like it's a tune that's familiar, and I couldn't figure out what anyone was singing. I was like trying to figure out the tune, and I couldn't. So. But
as opposed to just making it up,
made it up on his own, perhaps. Yeah.
He made it up on his own. It's probably a real tune, but he was supposed to have been making it up on his own. Okay, so one thing that my community knows about me that I've talked a lot about, sometimes very openly, sometimes kind of quickly, is that I don't wear a kippah. I also don't wear any kind of head covering. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I grew up very close to the Pico Robertson area, which is the more modern Orthodox frum community. And I grew up telling my mom that I was going to, when I grew up, this is how I would frame it, I would say, when I grow up, I'm going to be Orthodox so that I can have nice hair like them. Because I thought that because they were Orthodox, they had nice hair, and so I too would be Orthodox one day so that I could have nice hair. So even though I now understand that they had wigs on, the idea has always been with me that I would cover my hair when I'm married. I'm not married, so I don't cover my hair. The conservative movement has a stance, just like all other mitzvot that are available to women to do, right? Like there are some mitzvot that are specific to men because of men's bodies or men's obligations. There are others that can be done by men and women, even if they were created just for males. Kippah is one of them. So in the Reform and the conservative movement, women are encouraged, are suggested, are allowed to cover their heads. I remember when I was a Rosh Hashanah at Camp Ramah, that one of the many conversations that we had around this was, should we tell girls that they have to because we tell boys that they have to, right? I grew up going to Jewish day school where boys got detention for not having a kippah, whereas I was never told to put a kippah on a day of my life. So should girls have to if boys have to, and we're trying to be an egalitarian society? So when I was bat mitzvah, I was told that I had to wear a kippah on the bima because I was going to be reading Torah. So this was the kippah that I wore because I did not want to wear a kippah. So it was like the girly version of a kippah. I'm sure many of you have seen these, and many of you might even have these. It has a clip in the back, and I would just put it on my head, and I wore this. Correct, Norm?
Norm was saying that it's not a mitzvah, it's a minhag. I was just saying.
Oh, yeah, that's correct. Okay. Which is why I said it's correct. So then I stopped wearing a kippah after my bat mitzvah because no one was telling me, even when I went up to the bima, that I had to cover my head. It was really something that the shul that I grew up at was telling us to do for the bar bat mitzvah kid. When I went to Israel, I knew that I was going to be a rabbi a few years later and that I would be in situations in which I would be asked to cover my head. I don't love wearing a kippah, probably because, quite frankly, I grew up with all brothers. I have 3 younger brothers. And I also grew up in schooling where boys were told to do these things and girls weren't. And so in my mind still, I'm sure if I went to therapy, I could work through this, that these things are very male. These things are very masculine to me. However, I went to a kippah store on Ben Yehuda and I got 2 kippot. I got one that is black that I'll show you here. It's like a cute little, it's like knitted very nicely and pretty and looked more feminine to me than not. That if I'm told to wear a kippah during the week, I will wear this because I like that it doesn't stand out. I have dark brown hair, so I like that it doesn't stand out. And then I have a white kippah that I keep in my Shabbos talis bag, which is not here, so I can't show it to you. And I wear that one if I'm told to cover my head. In my current job, am not told that I have to. As my congregants know, there is, in the bylaws, women are supposed to cover their head when they go to the bima. And I just learned that recently, and it's something that I've thought a lot about, but we've spoken enough about it that everyone's comfortable with my practice. But if I'm doing a bat mitzvah, which I will be doing this Shabbat, because the bat mitzvah girl is being told she has to cover her hair with a kippah, I will wear a kippah without asking any questions. I'll come to the service wearing a kippah. I will wear the kippah very proudly because I think that it is important. Hi, Vered. I think that it is important as a female role model and female rabbi to show that this is something that I will do, even if I don't have a whole existential conversation with the bat mitzvah girl about why it's not my practice. So I always wear a kippah if there is a bat mitzvah. I don't wear one if there's a bar mitzvah. We could talk about that another time. So I want to show you other head coverings that women are using these days. So there's obviously a sheitel, right? You could wear a wig and cover your hair. As those of you who saw Unorthodox saw, there are also extreme Orthodox movements where the woman shaves her head so that there is not any hair that could ever be seen. Also, in listening to some going down rabbit holes after watching Unorthodox, there are also some women in those movements for whom they know that others are shaving their heads, and they recognize that because they're wearing a sheitel and sometimes what's called a tichel, like a scarf over the wig, that it's very hot. And so to not have hair also and 3 layers, to your skull, that to not have hair is sometimes a benefit. It's not the reason why they do it though. So there's, in the conservative movement specifically, and like leaning more traditional conservative, there is something that's kind of come out called the headband nation. And so I wanted to show you a few different things that, again, I'm not married, so I don't wear these things for these purposes, but I'm going to show you what they could look like. I guess if like my husband walked through the door right now, I'd be very prepared. But so here's a headband, right, that it has a little bit more fabric than just like one of those wire headbands that you might see young girls wear. This is also a thing. It's very popular in Israel when it's cold, which is why I have it, because it goes over your ears, but it also has more thickness, I guess, to it. And the idea behind Headband Nation is that you are covering your head like a kippah would cover your head, but in a more effeminate way. And so you are showing reverence for God, for a moment that you are in. Some people wear it all the time by covering your head, just like a man would cover his head with a kippah, but you're doing it with something that, Rabbi Pernick wouldn't be caught wearing this, but I would because it's a feminine garment, right? Or you can wear this. I'll send it. Okay. The other thing, and I can't remember why I bought this hat. It might have been because of our LaFell trip, but I don't remember. We were told we had to cover our hair no matter if we were married or not, and I didn't have a hat. So I bought a hat in Israel with my friend Sarah, and I've never worn this again because it's a hat like that I would cover my whole head with. And this is something that you might see women wear just over the top of their head with the hair out, or some women, depending on their religiosity, would put their head all the way inside this.
Their hair all the way inside, not their head all the way inside.
Their head is funnier though. Their hair, now I kind of want to see if I can put my whole head in. Their hair all the way inside this, which is the reason that I had to buy it, because I needed something that covered all my hair.
Mala or something?
I don't know why I have it. I have it and I bought it in Israel and I don't remember why, but it must have been Lafel because Sarah was there. So that was all a very in-depth presentation with props, which I was excited about, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I think the one thing that I will say that kind of makes me different than others in the conservative movement, like the cantor of our shul wears a kippah every day, is that for some reason, and again, I think this is based on how I was brought up, kippah just isn't my thing. And it's not something that I feel comfortable wearing. It's something that when I wear it, I don't feel any more connected to God or any more religious or any holier by wearing it. In fact, I typically am very aware of the fact that I'm wearing it, which is distracting. And it's something that I look forward to when I get married, being able to cover my head. And so in not covering my hair, that to me feels like a thing to look forward to, as opposed to something that I could do now and would never change. That's very different for a lot of different conservative women. Those who belong to Beth Am know that we have women who come to shul with hats every week. We have women who come to shul with their heads completely covered every week. We have women who don't wear kippot, and we have women who wear kippot all the time. So I think the conservative movement, and I'm sure Rabbi Pernick could speak to the reform movement as well, that women do a lot of different things in terms of how they cover their hair. Yeah.
Okay, I would encourage, if we open up the floor now, we've sort of been in, a good amount of talking, but Bonnie, I see you're muted.
Josh just told me that I talked a lot. Yeah, Bonnie.
Oh, both of us, we presented. So now, other people have thoughts to share.
Thank you. Very nice, very nice.
You've talked about types of head coverings and habits, but you haven't discussed the law. Where is it written in the Torah about head coverings, and is it rabbinic? And what is the reason? And what is the reason for the head shaving among certain Orthodox women? Is that totally modesty, or is there some other Jewish law concerning that?
Yeah.
Sure. So I can get started on kippah. So as when Norm commented, saying it's not a mitzvah, and I said correct, there is no law in the Torah, nor is there a law in the Mishnah, nor is there a law in the Shulchan Aruch or in any other code of Jewish law saying that you have to wear a kippah. It is so in the Talmud. There's a few stories. I can actually put them up on the screen. Here. So there's a couple stories about in the Talmud about people wearing kippots, rabbis in the Talmud. So, for example, there's a story that Rav Huna said he would not walk 4 cubits with an uncovered head. There's then this great, this him saying that he would do it. There's a story about these astrologers who told Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's mother, your son will be a thief. And then because of that, his mom didn't allow him to uncover his head. She said to her son, cover your head so that the fear of heaven will be upon you, and pray for divine mercy. I didn't know why. One day his kippah fell off and he saw this palm tree and was overcome by impulse and climbed up and bit off a bunch of dates with his teeth, right? So there's stories like that in the Talmud about head coverings, not kippah specifically, but head coverings more generally, which all seem to be coming from a place of humility or piety. And all relates. I can show more sources if people want to see, but they're all things that individuals are saying they do as a way of either remembering God is above them, or sort of in some way demonstrating a yirat shamayim, like a fear of sin. But none of it is required. It never says it in the Torah. Never. Again, all of these are rabbis saying it's good to cover your head because it's a sign of humility, just like walking bent over and not with not standing up straight. Those are similar things. And I'll share my screen one more time, because the Maharshal, who's a rabbi around the same time as the Shulchan Aruch, who's the Code of Jewish Law, writes, he's like, I don't understand what people are talking about saying everyone has to wear a kippah. Like, this isn't a thing. Like, what's going, and he ends by saying, by quoting this source from the Talmud and Kedushin that we just saw about, where Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, you shouldn't walk 4 cubits with an upright posture because it's seen as haughty. And then Rav Huna said he would not walk 4 cubits with his head uncovered because he said the divine presence is above my head. So for one thing, it seems like we're more strict about walking with an erect posture than walking with head uncovered. And either way, it's things that people took upon themselves. And she says nowadays, this last line, the opposite is the case. They're not careful about avoiding an erect posture. On the contrary, the proud and the rich walk around with their heads held high. But they're careful about uncovering their heads, not because of piety, but because they think this is the Jewish religion, right? So there's sort of a signifier that right, like with Nazi and Amir, it's like you're not wearing a kippah, people are going to think you're not Jewish, or you're not religious. It's has a very deep cultural significance. It has, I'm not going to say zero, but close to zero halakhic significance. Certainly not required, and it seems to be sort of an individual act of demonstrating your piety, not in any way required.
Sorry. It also is something that signifies that you're Jewish, right? When we went to Ramallah, the men were not allowed to wear kippot. They had to wear hats because they were not allowed to show their religion on the outside of them, right? And so that is one of the things also that when talking about kippah and this idea that just because it's a minhag that's been practiced so much and then become this kind of category of minhag kehalacha, that we know that you will continue to do it because it allows you to also affirm that which you feel on the inside, on the outside. And so there's no punishment for not, but there's also reason to wear it. And just very quickly, in terms of the women shaving their head, it's in this category of going kind of the extra mile, right? That if female hair is seen as a type of seduction or nakedness, that you are not supposed to show any of that hair to anybody but your partner. And in that denomination of orthodoxy, right, we're talking very strict orthodoxy, the women take it one level further and say, well, then I shouldn't be showing my hair to anybody. That if it's that seductive, if it's that powerful, that maybe it shouldn't be that I have that much hair at all. So it's a position that I couldn't find much information on other than that I saw that a lot when I looked it up. But then again, as I mentioned before, there's also women who talk about how because other people are doing it, they recognize that there is something that is also easy about it because they're not going to be showing their hair anyway. So to be able to cover it with ease and with comfort is better.
Well, just if I could say quickly, I see that Barbara also have...
if they shave their heads, then why would they need to cover their head at all? Because there's no hair there.
Well, so I think the idea really is, covering your head, right? So even if you're bald, you still can cover your head, right? Men still cover their head even if they're bald. Sometimes they cover their hair because they're bald. But I think in the Haredi context with women, there's this idea that, the mitzvot are things that everyone is supposed to follow. So, one way of demonstrating your loyalty and fealty to God is by observing the mitzvot, but like, how do you show you really, really love God? And if you're already going to do the mitzvot anyway, like, how do you show that you're so committed? Is always by adding on more and more chumras, right? Adding more stringencies beyond what's required by the law to show I'm so committed. I'm going to do this, all the way. So, okay, fine. You're supposed to cover your hair. So some people say, I'm not going to allow any hair to show. And some people say, I'm going to take it, the next level chumrah. I'm going to shave my head. So no one, there's no possibility of my hair being out there. And then that becomes a norm. So it's sort of chumrah, and then that becomes normalized. And then so now the next generation is another level of chumrah, and then that becomes normalized, and then it just keeps building, right?
Is it law?
No, none of it. No, it is not Jewish law. But it would fall in that category of chumrah, of adding stringency upon stringency upon stringency as a way of kind of showing that, what's for the previous generation was stringency, for the next generation is just minhag.
It's the game of I can be more devout than you were.
Right. So I'm thinking about so there's interesting stories when it comes to Jewish law. This is very, very different kind of context, but and I'll get to you, Jeff and Barbara. Don't worry, I didn't forget about you. There's an interesting historical development here where, not when it comes to head covering. Oh no, more people raising their hands. Okay, we'll get to everyone. Don't worry. Quick story. So when it comes to laws with mikvah, with women going to mikvah, so like it sort of was one of these things where it became stricter. If you followed the Torah, 7 days after, your period starts, you go to the mikvah. And then the rabbis kind of expand that and say, no, whatever. No, 3 days, whatever, you wait 3 days and then you go to mikvah. Then you wait 4 days and then you go to, you wait 4 days, then you count 7 days, then you go to mikvah. Then you wait 5 days, then you count 7 days, then you go to mikvah. And so Maimonides talks about a minhag that developed in his days of women, when their period started, waiting 7 days, then starting to count 7 days, right? The Shiva Nikim, the 7 days, and then going to mikvah. So ultimately waiting 14 days before going to the mikvah, which it was sort of presented by the women as like, we're being machmir, we're adding chumras, but was also a form of birth control. And he was saying this is a terrible thing because, by adding on all these chumras, you're actually not allowing babies to be born. So, and probably the women knew that, and it's probably why they were doing it. But, there's like those, the downsides that can happen of adding stringency upon stringency is sometimes it's actually, you're like ultimately doing the opposite of what you were trying to do. It's
funny that you just brought up Nita, because I thought that you were going to talk about how there's also the reason that women will give in those communities for shaving their head because they're going to mikvah more often, and that's where I thought you were going. Wow. That there's also, because they're doing more of those practices, that they are worried that if they go under in the mikvah, that if they have long hair, that not every part of them will end up under the water. And so they cut their hair very, very short so that they don't have to worry about that since they're going to mikvah so often.
Okay, so just so that I clearly understand, the covering of the head for both men and women is not law and it's not rabbinic, it's actually custom.
So men and women is different. I will say, what we're really talking about is for men. For women, it's understood, it's a debate about whether it's law or minhag. It says in Tractate Ketubot that a husband can divorce his wife because she doesn't cover her hair. For example.
That what?
Oh, a man, among the reasons, it's sort of giving examples of how we have no fault divorce in Judaism, and sort of in giving examples of, a man can divorce his wife if he doesn't like her food, or, it's sort of basically the idea of no fault divorce, but it includes within that if she goes around with her hair uncovered.
You also wouldn't find a woman in these communities, you wouldn't find a woman not covering her head. Whereas if a man, dropped his kippah, it wouldn't be, he would put it back on his head immediately, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. A woman would never find herself without her head uncovered.
Yeah, I just want to know if it's a mitzvah and the commandment that a woman covers.
So for women, it's more complicated. For men, it's purely minhag. For women, right, it's like, there are those who say it's a commandment and there are those who say it's not. And if you read the Talmud, you could read it either way, essentially, is what it comes down to.
We can learn about this in Midrash Rabbani. How about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a debate.
Okay.
Okay. Let's start with Jeff and then Barbara and then Norm. If Norm, yeah.
A little personal background. I grew up in a Reform synagogue in Worcester, Temple Emmanuel. And in those days, we all wore yarmulkes when we went into the sanctuary and bar mitzvah and everything. And then through many years of college and graduate school, I didn't go to temple very much. But when I came down here and I joined another Reform temple, I noticed a lot of guys did not wear yarmulkes. And I felt very uncomfortable, even though I hadn't been going to temple much. I just felt very uncomfortable. So I do. When I go to shul, I wear a yarmulke all the time, but, a lot of people don't. It's just how habits die hard. You don't, again, it's not a law. And it's not even customary at Gates of Prayer that everybody wear a yarmulke, but I grew up like that, and it's just, it stayed with me. And I did want to show you one other thing in terms of yarmulkes.
The Red Sox kippah with
Red Sox
in the
yarmulke.
background, Yeah, perfect. That's beautiful. Dad, do you want anything you want to say about kippot in the Reform movement and just a brief? Going to make a brief.
No, I was the assistant rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Worcester Worcester.
Yeah.
With Stanley Davids in 1982 to 85. So.
Oh my gosh.
If I'm also interested if there's like a little bit of the sort of within the Reform context, because I know originally people did not wear a kippot, and that was a thing, and then it kind of changed over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the variety of kippot you saw before, you can see all of those in any Reform service because they're not being worn to indicate a religious philosophy. It's really more style, and I have most of those just on my shelf behind me, and it's kind of a question of what am I wearing that day and what color coordinates and etc. It's interesting because when I grew up, I mean, I remember back in my bar mitzvah, which was in Detroit, and I'm almost positive that I did not wear a kippah, and I don't think anybody did. Actually, the rabbis wore I guess it was sort of a talit, may have been more of a stole, but now the norm is that, most men will, but it varies, and I think it depends on the part of the country that you're in as well. Up here in the Northeast, even in the very liberal Reform temples, I think most men will wear some type of kippah. But in other parts of the country, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, in Los Angeles, the Reform movements, the Reform shuls that I know of at least, you might see more women wearing talit and kippah than you do men.
Thank you, Dad. Okay, Barbara. I see Eileen also.
Okay, mine is really a question, and I may have misunderstood when Rabbi Schatz was talking about the gold one that you had, the gold.
Yeah, the beaded one, yeah.
Not the one that looks like crocheted. I'm talking about
the bead, yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to ask Rabbi Pernick,
the elder,
you know what Jessie Wilson wears on her head?
Oh, yeah. So
is that the same as what Rabbi Schatz was talking about?
It's different. So there's sort of different Israeli styles. What Jessie wears is a very Israeli style kind of scarf. So Israeli women tend to wear their hair up more. And yeah, when people see the Wilsons, they think they're Israeli, and they're not. But it's so one thing is what Rabbi Schatz had, like the hats, which is one thing that often Israeli women will wear their hair up, covered by a hat. And then there's other styles, and I don't know all the terminology. I'm sure if my sister was here, she would.
This is very fun, though, to hear you go through the terminology.
Yeah, because it's not a tichel. Yeah, and
I don't know. I mean, my thing about it is both Rabbi Greenberg and Rabbi Tobolowsky's wives wore those.
Yeah, right.
And
my predecessors.
And also,
are you talking about like a wrap? Is that maybe the word
like
you're looking for?
and Ethan's wife. I'm blanking on Ethan's last name, but
Lyndon.
He's a conservative rabbi. And she also wore them. And I was like, I must have missed something living in Texas, because all of a sudden it seemed like Orthodox and conservative women were wearing these head covers. They look like scarves, but they're a little more.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Typically, women who are wearing them will call them wraps, because what they do is they literally are a big piece of fabric that you can wrap in different directions. And the reason I think that conservative women started wearing them is because they look nicer than what they might have been wearing before. They're more fashion forward. They're often very beautiful designs. As Rabbi Pernick mentioned, they kind of have a modern entity to them because Israeli women are often wearing them. So there's a market for them. And I think that that's how it kind of crossed. I know that, for example, the modern Orthodox synagogue that we are very close to, both geographically and relationally, that if you saw a mix of women from these two synagogues together in a room, you wouldn't necessarily, based on their headdress, know who goes to which shul. So those things have kind of crossed over. I think if you saw a woman wearing a kippah, you would know, oh, she must go to Beth Am. That's not really happening at the modern Orthodox shul, definitely, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, and I just recently saw a picture of Dalia Topolovsky at a big formal thing, and she was wearing one. And I was sort of surprised that, I don't know. I don't think, maybe she probably doesn't even have a wig.
Right. Yeah, I think that's kind of become, again, a norm. I'm not going to say the norm, but and I think it really comes out of Israel, and then is sort of, as things happen, it's sort of stylish in Israel, and the cool Israeli frum women do it, and then both Orthodox and conservative women are going to Israel, and they're saying, "Oh, those are cool, those wraps." And so
right, and they're not wearing some little schmata.
Schmata, exactly.
Yeah. No more schmatas. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Leonard and Rebecca have their hand up.
Okay, and Eileen and Norm, we haven't forgotten about you either.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, we're good.
I was wondering what it is in the Orthodox world about making sure you wear a kippah when you're eating. I can give you two examples. I used to, once upon a time, I worked at a company where the president of the company was Orthodox, and he did not wear a kippah all day long, except when he was eating. And then we also have a Haredi, Rebecca's uncle in Philadelphia. And the first time I visited him, he had no complaints at all, or didn't express any complaints at all, until he offered me something to eat when I visited him. And then he insisted that I put a kippah on. So I'm just wondering what the connection there is.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to pull this back up. When the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, talks about kippot, but it says there are those who say, it's again not law but custom, there are those who say that it's forbidden to bring remembrance from one's mouth, i.e. say God's name with an uncovered head. And there are those that say one should protest against entering a synagogue with an uncovered head. If someone's walking into shul without a kippah, you should say, hey, you don't have a kippah on. But the key is mentioning God's name. So if you're saying a bracha before you eat anything, it's a different bracha for different blessing for different types of food. It's like going to a synagogue. You're going to say God's name, hopefully. So some people who don't wear a kippah all the time do wear a kippah when they're going to say God's name. Where that exactly comes from is not super clear. There's in the Talmudic story I mentioned before about, the mother telling her son to cover his head and, cover your head and pray for divine mercy. So maybe it's from there, this idea of, God will be happier if you're praying if you have something on your head. It's not so clear, but that becomes an idea that's specifically connected to mentioning God's name, which then becomes connected with eating and praying. Because those are times when you're also not just blessing the food before you eat it. You're also saying a whole bracha after you eat it. So there's a lot of blessing happening around eating.
And I know specifically at Ramah, the reason we have kids boys wear kippot at meals is because they also go right into mincha. Now, obviously, that's not the case everywhere in the world. But given the hour of things that they would be prepared to be in a prayer setting, even if it's not just because the food, but because prayer is going to follow.
Okay, Norm. No? Okay.
Norm often has really good things to say, so it makes sense that we thought he did.
At some point he had a hand up. Okay. Eileen. You're muted, though. You're muted, Eileen.
I want to tell a very funny story. A reception was given at the Reformed Temple Sinai in New Orleans. I'm welcoming the new Catholic bishop to the community. And we attended, and Rabbi Cohn stood up and gave this very nice sermon, really stating his background as having come from an Orthodox family, but that had made the movement into the Reformed community, and outlined all of his history. And then he welcomed the bishop. The bishop stood up and in his full regalia and said to Rabbi Cohn, after thanking him and all of the usual normal statements, he said to Rabbi Cohn, however, I want to give you a gift because you come from a background in which it was appropriate that you wear a head covering. I am giving you my red beanie, and took it off and put it on Rabbi Cohn's head.
That's awesome.
And I tell you, everybody was really hysterical. So obviously the Catholics revere having a head covering, at least by the bishop.
At least by the bishops, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really great point that a lot of a lot of religions, especially in the more quote orthodox of a religion, you'll see head coverings, right? You'll see men, women, all kinds of head coverings, not just in prayer settings, but all over, and of different kinds, right? Of full head coverings for women versus, half head coverings. And those things also happen in religions outside of Judaism in terms of the kind of spectrum of what kind of head covering is being worn and used, but it's all because of this piety and this reverence for a deity, for God in our case.
I think that in the Christian tradition, it's customary for men to remove their hats when they go into a church.
Sorry, I thought someone else was going to answer. I believe that you are correct. I know that there are different head dresses that leadership wear, but in terms of just someone who might be walking into a church, I know that a hat, specifically, if you're wearing a hat, you might take off a hat. They don't have a kippah, but you would take off a hat to show some kind of honor. I don't know if that's still the case. I know that used to be the case, and that used to be kind of the modest way of showing reverence for the space that you're in. I assume that it still stands, but I don't know.
In China, Jews and Muslims that entered China became distinguished by the Chinese by the type of kippah or head covering that they were wearing. So one had white kippah, let's say, and the Muslims might have had blue. So that's the Chinese differentiated them in a positive sense that way.
Right, and I think that's sort of a great point to kind of also wrap it all up. Is the ways in which it becomes a signifier. And is it white? There's no reason behind one group wearing white and one group wearing blue. But it sort of becomes a thing. Like even when I often will, like I said, wear a white kippah on Shabbos, and I've had Israelis come up to me and be like, it's so nice to see a white kippah, because it's like an Israeli, it's like a Yerushalmi thing. I don't know why, but people in Jerusalem wear white kippot on Shabbos. I don't and so Israelis, when they see it, they're like, it feels right. So it's just sort of an interesting, again, sort of purely sociological. There's nothing halachic there. Certainly not with the different types, but you end up, standing out if you're not wearing the type that your community wears. And, and often as people are changing their practice, their kippah changes along with it. I remember I used to wear a kippah sruga, a knitted kippah that was not black. And at one point I switched to wearing a black kippah. And I remember my mom was here, worrying about that. And I was like, no, there's actually no reason. It's just easier. I don't have to worry about matching. It's just it's, one color matches my hair, but it also comes across as frummer in some way, so it's, there's all these things where it kind of has some kind of a societal indicator, but there's nothing deeper than that. But it's sufficiently notable that the whole name of the show is Srugim, and people know Srugim, that means modern Orthodox Jews, so and it definitely does that.
The last thing that I will say to wrap this up is that I didn't talk about this so much because it's not the way that I focus on kippah, but I want to just empower those of you who are women or who have women in your lives who like to wear kippah. I think it's a wonderful thing. I didn't mean to come across as someone who doesn't wear it and that should be an example. I think everyone should be allowed to choose for themselves what is comfortable for them, whether that's wearing the doily of days of, that they could wear when they go up to the bima, or if that's no head covering, or if that's full head covering, whatever it is, or if that's a kippah. I think any of those things for a woman specifically, I think are perfectly okay and wonderful for women to be able to have that as a freedom of theirs to be able to choose what to wear. And the last thing that I'll say that I hope changes across genders is that excuse me, is that it's not something that feels forced. I was in Durham, North Carolina 2 Shavuots ago, and Josh was there, and I walked into the sanctuary, and services had not started, and I had not even put my stuff down before someone ran up to me and smacked a kippah on my head, and I turned around and I said, "Give me a second. You gotta just chill. I know what I'm doing." And they didn't mean anything by it, but it comes across as very harsh when we say to people, this is what you must do, this is what must happen. And people who know what a kippah is and what it's used for are going to put it on because they know that it's a respectful thing to do. So I hope that as we're around children specifically and in school settings, that we are not making students or adults feel like it is something that is pressurized or forced, but that they can learn about it and learn why it's something that's important and can help signify us as a people.
Okay, I want to make one more comment before coming to Karen, because
Karen gets the last word.
Yeah, that wasn't, by the way, it was a different, it wasn't my show in Durham that.
No, it was not Josh who came and slapped a kippah on my head. That is true.
Yes. Other
sorry if that was confusing.
Yeah. No, but I was thinking about when you were saying that, reminds me of my brother-in-law. So many to most, I would say most Orthodox men who are not married don't wear a tallis, typically, when davening. I do when I'm here, in shul, but typically Orthodox men who are not married don't wear a tallis. But I remember my brother-in-law's shul in Baltimore. There was a guy, if I walked in, if any guy walked in, he would run over to you with a tallis. It was okay, or you don't have tallis on. I was yeah, I'm aware. So there is something about that, and it's important to allow people to, often people they are making decisions consciously. So as much as it's good, the Shulchan Aruch says that, you should tell someone if they're walking into shul without a kippah. There are those who say you should tell them, but there's also, custom variants, and it's important to recognize those and that people might be making this decision consciously. Okay, Karen, last word.
You have to unmute first.
What?
Oh, there you go. Now we can hear you.
Oh, okay. So 2 short stories. One, I always wanted to wear a tallis. Was not brought up religiously but I always wanted, but I felt I couldn't unless there was some ceremony. Or it was not a bat mitzvah. And so actually Susan Leiter, a rabbi that we there, did a sisterhood event and did a ceremony for those who wanted to wear a tallis. And I bought one when Molly, my daughter, was So just saying that. I am also a gabbai at Rabbi Schatz's synagogue. And as a gabbai, if a woman is coming up to have an aliyah, I run over to them with a kippah. I don't slam it on her head. I will just offer it. Yeah. And I had one woman say, no. And I didn't know what to do. And the same thing with men and talit. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we do offer talit when men walk in. Mm-hmm. So very interesting. From those who have to enforce rules to, anyway.
For sure.
Chag Sameach, everybody.
Chag Sameach, Karen, and thank you for ending this on such a beautiful note.
Yeah. My dad is asking all kinds of questions about why single men don't wear talitot, which I said I will probably get to in a later episode. I imagine is something that will come back up. So we'll leave that. It's another thing where there's no good reason for it. It's just a minhag. But we'll probably get to that.
It's a definer. It's so that people know who's.
Yeah, without having seen Srugim, it seems like the kind of thing that might come up.
I think they will daven again. Yes, I think we can.
I'll get to it later. We got to save material for later, So I'll call it there for the evening. Thank you all for joining.
Everyone. See you soon.
Thank you.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.